There is a moment when God stops correcting in private and starts correcting in public. That moment is rarely loud at first. It doesn't come with thunder, hashtags, or a warning memo sent out to everyone who underestimated you. It begins quietly, almost unannounced, while the people who worked against you are still confident, still smiling, still convinced the story they told about you has settled as truth. That confidence is important because God allows it. He lets it mature. He lets it get comfortable. He lets it overstay its welcome, not out of cruelty, but out of precision. Here's a fact most people don't like to admit. False narratives don't collapse because someone argues better. They collapse because reality eventually shows up uninvited. History, courtrooms, workplaces, families, and even scripture all point to the same pattern. Exposure happens when deception becomes too heavy to carry. Lies require maintenance. Truth just waits. And waiting, as boring as it sounds, turns out to be one of God's favorite tools. What makes this season different is that the shift isn't private anymore. You're not being quietly validated behind closed doors while publicly misunderstood. The correction is moving into the open, where witnesses are present and excuses don't survive. The people who were so sure you would never recover, never be believed, never be taken seriously again, are about to experience the most uncomfortable form of revelation, watching the story change without being able to stop it. Think of it as God hitting update while they're still bragging about the old version. And yes, there is a strange kind of humor in it, not the laugh out loud kind, but the divine irony kind. The same mouths that dismissed you will soon struggle to explain what everyone can now see. The same confidence they used against you becomes the stage on which their error is exposed. You don't clap, you don't announce victory, you just stand there, slightly amazed, realizing that what felt like delay was actually timing, and that the celebration ahead isn't about revenge but relief. Number one, God doesn't expose enemies for drama, but to end cycles that prayer alone could not break. There are situations where prayer softens hearts, restores relationships, and quietly fixes what was broken. And then there are situations where prayer has already done everything it can do, and the problem isn't ignorance anymore, it's intent. Some people know exactly what they're doing. They know the damage they're causing, the lies they're spreading, the pressure they're applying behind the scenes. They don't stop because nothing has forced them to. That's when exposure becomes necessary, not as punishment, but as a full stop. God is not interested in embarrassing people for entertainment. He's interested in ending patterns that keep repeating because no one has ever been held accountable. Private warnings don't work on people who thrive in secrecy. Quiet corrections mean nothing to those who rely on shadows. So God removes the shadows. Not suddenly, not randomly, but at the precise moment when the truth can no longer be twisted or dismissed as coincidence. What makes this uncomfortable is that exposure doesn't just reveal what they did. It reveals how long it's been happening and how many people benefited from pretending not to see it. That's why it feels intense. It's not one moment collapsing, it's an entire system losing its cover. The cycle breaks because the same tricks no longer work once everyone knows the playbook. This is also why God waits. If exposure came too early, it would look like an overreaction, too late, and the damage would spread further. Timing matters because the goal isn't shock, it's finality. When God exposes, there is no sequel. The pattern doesn't regenerate under a new name. It ends. For you, this isn't about watching someone fall. It's about finally being released from a loop you didn't create but were trapped inside. The misunderstanding, the pressure, the quiet resistance you kept meeting for no clear reason, all of it traces back to something hidden that refused to stay hidden forever. Exposure closes the door prayer opened. It's not dramatic, it's decisive. And once it happens, life moves forward without the weight of repeating the same battle in a different form. Number 2. The humiliation comes only after God proves you never needed to explain yourself. There is a deep frustration that comes from being misunderstood while knowing you could clear everything up if you just spoke. You replay conversations in your head. Imagine the perfect explanation, the missing detail that would finally make people say, "Oh, now I get it." But what holds you back isn't fear. It's something stronger, an inner restraint that won't let you rush to defend yourself. That restraint isn't accidental. It's God proving a point before he makes a move. Explanations can fix confusion, but they rarely fix perception. People who already decided who you are aren't waiting for clarity. They're waiting for confirmation of what they want to believe. That's why God often keeps you quiet, not as a test of patience, but as a demonstration. When you don't explain, argue, or overperform to be understood, time starts doing the work you attempted to do yourself. Patterns emerge, contradictions surface, stories stop lining up. The humiliation of your enemies doesn't come from you being proven right in an argument. It comes from you being proven unnecessary to the process. The truth rises without your help. That's what stings. They expected resistance, emotional reactions, long defenses. Instead, they got consistency. While they kept adjusting their version of events, you stayed the same. And over time, that contrast becomes impossible to ignore. This is also why the exposure feels heavier for them than it looks from the outside. They didn't just misjudge you, they misjudged how reality works. They assumed silence meant weakness, that no explanation meant no evidence. They didn't account for the way facts stack up quietly, or how character reveals itself over long stretches of time. By the time the truth shows itself, it doesn't need your voice. It already has witnesses. God waits until the moment your words would actually cheapen what's about to happen. If you explained yourself earlier, people could argue motives, tone, or delivery. But when events explain you, there's nothing to debate. The humiliation comes from realizing you were never protected by silence. You were strengthened by it. And when the truth finally stands on its own, everyone understands why you were never meant to say a thing. Number 3. Celebration arrives when false narratives collapse under their own weight. There's a weight that some lies carry, but it's a fragile one. For a while they feel solid, because enough people believe them, enough people repeat them, and the person they target feels trapped under the pressure of defending themselves. It seems permanent. It seems unstoppable. But lies, no matter how carefully constructed, are built on a foundation that can't hold up to time and truth. Eventually, the cracks appear, and they start crumbling under their own weight. That's when the celebration comes, not because someone forced it, but because reality simply can't be denied anymore. This collapse is silent at first. It doesn't happen with fireworks or fanfare. The people who spread false stories notice subtle shifts. A conversation doesn't go their way. A fact surfaces they didn't account for. Someone they counted on no longer supports the story. Slowly, the facade begins to wobble, and when it falls, it doesn't just erase the lie. It changes perception entirely. People start seeing you as you truly are, not the version someone else painted. That moment is intoxicating because it's absolute. No argument can reverse it. No persuasion can reframe it. The story ends because it can't sustain itself. This is why celebration often arrives unexpectedly. You've already endured the stress, the doubt, and the watching eyes that questioned your every move. You've held your peace while others lied confidently. And now the lie collapses, and the truth rises effortlessly. The people who opposed you are left scrambling, not because you attacked them, but because their own creation betrayed them. The real beauty of this process is that it teaches a fundamental lesson. Truth doesn't need to rush. It doesn't need manipulation, noise, or exaggeration. It waits patiently, accumulating weight until the moment arrives where it's undeniable. Celebration isn't about revenge, it's about witnessing balance restored. It's about knowing that no amount of deceit could withstand the natural pull of truth. And in that moment, your vindication is complete, permanent, and unmistakable, leaving everyone to see that reality always wins over illusion. Number 4, God allows enemies to overplay their hand so the outcome is undeniable. There's a certain arrogance in people who oppose you, especially when they think they've measured the battlefield perfectly. They calculate your reactions, predict your moves, and assume their lies and schemes are foolproof. That arrogance isn't a flaw, it's part of the plan, because God allows it. He lets them overreach, not as a favor to them, but as a favor to you. When enemies play too hard, too fast, too confidently, the mask slips. Their intentions, once hidden, become exposed in full clarity. Overplaying is like a slow unraveling. At first, it's subtle. A word too many, a move too reckless, a secret shared with someone who shouldn't have heard it. They think they're clever, but cleverness without accountability is temporary. God times it so their miscalculations peak at exactly the right moment, making their collapse undeniable. When it happens, the revelation isn't just obvious, it's overwhelming. People don't have to guess who was wrong or who was deceitful. The evidence is so blatant that no amount of spin, denial, or rationalization can save them. This strategy is also strategic for you. If they had been careful, if they had stayed hidden, their deception might have lingered indefinitely, leaving you frustrated, misunderstood, and stuck in quiet battles that drained your energy. By letting them overplay, God forces the truth into the spotlight. The impact is permanent because it's public and self-inflicted. Their downfall isn't manufactured. It's a consequence of their own choices. Watching this unfold isn't about gloating, it's about clarity. The lines between right and wrong, truth and lies, loyalty and betrayal become crystal clear. The people who doubted you, judged you unfairly, or sided with deception now witness the reality without interference. The outcome is not just a personal victory. It's a divine statement that exposes the system of manipulation. God allows enemies to overplay because timing matters, and sometimes the most powerful victory comes not from what you do, but from letting the truth and their own hubris do the work for you. Number 5, public vindication is God restoring your credibility, not your ego. There's a difference between being proven right and being respected. And God's public vindication is never about stroking pride. It's about restoring your credibility in a way that cannot be ignored, denied, or misrepresented. For too long, people might have doubted you, dismissed your words, or questioned your integrity. Every whisper, every false accusation, every sideways glance chipped away at how others saw you. Public vindication is the moment those chips are restored, not as a reward for boasting, but as a divine correction of perception. When God moves, the world doesn't just notice, it adjusts. Suddenly, the people who wrote off your potential, laughed at your restraint, or assumed you wouldn't recover, are confronted with undeniable reality. Your name, your character, your story, all of it becomes untouchable because it now stands on evidence rather than opinion. This is not about ego gratification. It's about alignment. God restores what was wrongly taken or questioned so that you can move forward unburdened by doubt or misinformation. The beauty of this process is that it feels effortless from your side. You didn't have to argue, manipulate, or prove yourself endlessly. Your consistency, integrity, and patience were enough. Others might scramble, adjust their narratives, or even try to explain away what's happening, but the truth speaks louder than their excuses ever could. Your credibility is public and undeniable, but it comes without a single boast, because the power lies in clarity, not self-promotion. This restoration also serves a purpose beyond personal relief. It changes how others interact with you, reshapes relationships, and recalibrates respect. People can no longer casually dismiss your words or actions. Your authority is renewed, not because of who you are in isolation, but because God made it visible to all who mattered. Public vindication is never about ego. It's about setting the record straight in a way that no one can dispute, giving you the freedom, influence, and peace to operate in your season, without interference or shadow. Number 6, the delay was necessary so the exposure would be permanent, not temporary. Life has a way of teaching patience, and God uses delay as a tool to make sure His timing lands perfectly. It's frustrating when justice feels slow, when it seems like the people who wronged you are getting away with their actions while you're left waiting. But that waiting isn't meaningless. It's purposeful. A quick resolution might feel good in the moment, but it often fades. Temporary victories leave space for doubt, skepticism, and even future attacks. Permanent exposure, however, leaves no room for argument, no loopholes, and no room for the lie to regenerate. The delay allows the full picture to form. While your enemies are busy celebrating small wins, plotting their next move, or underestimating you, the foundation of their deception is quietly unraveling. Timing is everything because God wants the exposure to be unmistakable. When it happens, there is no question of what is true or who is right. The waiting ensures that when the truth finally lands, it lands with authority, weight, and clarity. It's like letting a seed grow in secret until it becomes a tree so large that it can no longer be ignored. Delays also serve to protect your energy and focus. If exposure came too early, it would demand reaction, argument, or intervention. You might feel compelled to defend yourself, to rush the process, or to justify decisions you didn't need to. God's timing ensures that by the time the exposure occurs, you no longer need to lift a finger. The truth works independently, leaving your enemies to confront the consequences of their actions fully on their own. Finally, the permanence of exposure strengthens your position for the future. The cycle ends decisively because the lesson is unmistakable. People witness the full extent of deception, hypocrisy, and dishonesty, and there is no room for manipulation. When God moves, He doesn't give temporary fixes or half measures. The delay was necessary, and now that it has culminated, the outcome is unshakable. The exposure lasts because it was timed perfectly, and with it comes a freedom that never fades, a victory that cannot be rewritten, and a peace that no one can take away. Number 7, God waits until even your enemies are tired of maintaining the lie. Deception takes work. Lies require constant attention, constant adjustment, and constant energy to keep the story alive. Your enemies don't just create a false narrative and leave it. They feed it, repeat it, defend it, and sometimes even believe it themselves. That effort is exhausting, but God doesn't move until it reaches its tipping point, until the people who opposed you are too worn out to continue. By waiting, He ensures that the exposure hits with full force, leaving no room for defense, excuse, or manipulation. When people are tired, their guard drops. The cracks appear. Inconsistencies surface. Small details they thought nobody noticed become glaringly obvious. The energy they once used to maintain control dissipates, and suddenly their lies can no longer hide behind confidence or charm. That is when the truth walks in, fully armed and undeniable. Timing matters because exposure before the lie is exhausted would allow them to scramble, adjust, and spin again. God ensures they are fully spent, so the collapse is total, permanent, and undeniable. This waiting period also teaches you something crucial. Patience and restraint are forms of strength. While your enemies were busy trying to control perception, you were conserving energy, building character, and preparing for a moment where intervention wouldn't feel like interference. It would feel like justice. By the time the lie unravels, you are not just vindicated. You are ready to step into the peace and authority that comes from witnessing the truth prevail without lifting a finger. The fatigue of your enemies guarantees the impact of their exposure. When people finally realize that the narrative they built is collapsing, they can't rely on excuses or misdirection. They are too tired to argue, too drained to manipulate, and too exposed to recover. And that is exactly when God acts. The timing is precise. The collapse is complete. And for you, it's not about revenge. It's about seeing clarity, truth, and justice emerge naturally, with every lie falling under the weight of its own unsustainable effort. Number 8. The celebration is quieter than you imagined because peace replaces adrenaline. Victory often comes in ways we don't expect. When God moves to expose your enemies and restore what was lost, the initial anticipation can feel like a rush, a spike of adrenaline that makes you imagine dramatic celebrations, loud triumphs, or public applause. But the truth is, the real moment of victory rarely looks like anything you imagined. Instead of chaos, there is calm. Instead of noise, there is a quiet, unshakable sense of relief that settles deep within you. Peace replaces adrenaline, and that peace is far more satisfying than any fleeting excitement. When the deception collapses and the truth rises, you realize that all the tension, all the sleepless nights, and all the anxiety you carried weren't wasted. They were refining your ability to receive what God had been preparing for you. The people who doubted you, opposed you, or misjudged you might react dramatically, but you don't need to. The celebration doesn't demand a response from you. It doesn't require you to shout or prove anything. The victory has a weight and permanence that energy and noise could never match. This quiet celebration is also a form of clarity. You can finally see who was authentic, who truly matters, and who was only around to contribute to the chaos. It brings a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the vindication, but for the growth, patience, and endurance that carried you through the waiting period. There is an inner applause that resonates far more than any external recognition could. The moment feels understated because the real reward is freedom. Freedom from doubt, from manipulation, from the constant pressure of being misunderstood. You don't celebrate with fanfare because the battle was already internal. You celebrate because the weight is lifted, the cycle is broken, and your space is reclaimed. This quiet peace is the ultimate signal that God's timing was perfect, that His strategy worked, and that the victory is permanent. The adrenaline fades, but the relief, clarity, and deep satisfaction last forever. Number 9, their humiliation is the moment people realize you were never the problem. One of the most powerful truths in life is that people often misjudge where the real problem lies. For months, sometimes years, you may have carried the weight of others' assumptions, blame, or resentment. You were treated like the obstacle, the cause of tension, the one who needed correction. Meanwhile, the real issue, the deception, malice, or misguided intentions, was hidden in plain sight. God's timing exposes that reality. When your enemies are publicly humbled, the narrative flips, and suddenly everyone sees the truth. You were never the problem. This revelation is profound because it rewrites perception. People who doubted you, judged your motives, or questioned your integrity are forced to confront the reality they ignored. It's not just about them losing face. It's about the world finally understanding that the burden you bore was never yours to carry. The humiliation of those who opposed you clarifies a truth that words, explanations, or protests could never convey. Your restraint, patience, and consistency were evidence of your strength, not a weakness to exploit. The power of this moment lies in its inevitability. Lies, manipulation, and false narratives can only survive for so long before reality intervenes. God's exposure of your enemies removes the fog of confusion that allowed them to frame you as the problem. Once the truth is undeniable, their attempts to justify themselves crumble, leaving witnesses with no choice but to reassess the situation and acknowledge what they previously missed. For you, this is liberating. The mental and emotional energy you spent defending yourself in silence becomes validated. You no longer need to prove anything because the truth has done it for you. The public recognition of your innocence and integrity is more satisfying than any private acknowledgement could ever be. The humiliation of your enemies is not just a correction for them, it's a confirmation for you. It signals the end of misunderstanding, the restoration of your reputation, and the start of a season where you can operate freely, knowing the world finally sees that the real problem was never you. Number 10. God does this publicly so you stop shrinking to keep others comfortable. For too long, many of us have dimmed our light, muted our voices, and held back our brilliance just to avoid rocking the boat. We shrink ourselves to make others feel safe, to prevent conflict, or to keep relationships from unraveling. It feels noble at first, sacrificing your space, your voice, and your truth for the comfort of those around you. But in reality, it often comes at a hidden cost. Your growth gets stifled, your purpose delayed, and your energy drained by people who never deserved your restraint. God's public exposure of your enemies is a way of ending that cycle once and for all. By allowing the world to see who is really working against you, God forces a confrontation that cannot be ignored. The people who once pressured you to shrink, conform, or apologize for being yourself are now faced with a truth they cannot twist. Their attempts to contain you, suppress you, or manipulate perception fail spectacularly. You no longer need to shrink to keep them comfortable because the spotlight is on reality. The scales tip in your favor, not because of ego or retaliation, but because God's timing makes it undeniable that you were never the problem, and you were never meant to dim your light for anyone. This public shift is liberating. Suddenly you can operate fully in your God-given authority without worrying about who might feel threatened by it. Your energy, previously spent on self-restraint, can now be used to build, grow, and expand. People witness your strength and integrity, and the pressure to compromise your authenticity vanishes. The purpose behind this public correction is clear. God wants you fully visible, fully heard, and fully empowered. Shrinking yourself never served your destiny. It only preserved the illusion of peace for those who thrived on control. By exposing your enemies publicly, God liberates you from that invisible weight. You are no longer performing, apologizing, or tiptoeing through life. Instead, you are free to rise unapologetically, confident that your space, voice, and purpose cannot be denied, ignored, or diminished by anyone again. Number 11. Exposure happens when your growth threatens systems built on your silence. There is a quiet power in growth that people rarely recognize. As you rise, develop, and become more aligned with your purpose, you inevitably disrupt the structures others have built around your limitations. Some of these systems are social, some are professional, and some are deeply personal. But they all share one thing in common. They thrive on your silence. They rely on the assumption that you will stay small, compliant, or invisible. Your progress alone becomes a threat because it exposes the cracks in their carefully constructed narratives. God allows this exposure to occur precisely when your growth becomes undeniable, forcing those who depended on your quiet to confront reality. The timing is deliberate. If your growth happened too early or too secretly, the systems built on your silence might have continued unchallenged, quietly undermining your influence or reputation. But when you expand into your purpose fully, when your energy, skill, and character reach a tipping point, the structures around you begin to collapse. Lies, manipulation, and hidden agendas can no longer operate under the weight of your rising truth. God's exposure doesn't just remove the obstacles, it reveals the very mechanisms that tried to contain you. This moment is revelatory for everyone involved. For you, it's a powerful confirmation that your perseverance, discipline, and faith were never wasted. For your enemies or those invested in keeping you constrained, it's a stark realization that the power they relied upon was fragile, temporary, and ultimately powerless against genuine growth. The beauty of this process is that the exposure is not fueled by vengeance, it is fueled by inevitability. The higher you rise, the more unsustainable their control becomes. The truth doesn't need to be argued, it simply emerges, undeniable and transformative. When God allows your growth to expose these systems, He is not only vindicating you, but also rewriting the rules for everyone watching. The cycle of suppression ends because nothing can resist authentic expansion, and the world witnesses the power of a person fully aligned with their purpose, no longer confined by the limitations others tried to impose. Number 12. The real loss for your enemies is not reputation, but influence. Most people think that when God exposes someone's deceit, their humiliation is about losing face. They imagine embarrassment, awkward moments, and social judgment. But the deeper, more permanent loss is not in how others see them. It's in the power they once had to affect people, decisions, and outcomes. Influence is the currency that drives control, manipulation, and authority. When that influence collapses, nothing they do can regain the leverage they once held over situations or over people's perception. God's public exposure strips them not of vanity, but of the very tool they use to operate in shadows. Influence is subtle, often invisible to the naked eye, and that's what makes its loss devastating. Your enemies may have built networks, relied on alliances, or spread lies that shaped how others behaved, thought, or judged. When God exposes the truth, all of those systems unravel. People start seeing patterns they missed before, motives they misread, and intentions that were never pure. The loss is systemic. It isn't just one person turning away. It's the gradual collapse of the web they wove. What once worked effortlessly now requires effort, and effort alone cannot restore what was lost when credibility and perception are gone. For you, this is liberating. The people who attempted to control outcomes or distort your narrative can no longer dictate your path. Their sway over decisions, relationships, or reputations disappears naturally, without confrontation or argument. You don't need to chase acknowledgement, and you don't need to prove yourself. The influence they depended on for leverage is gone, leaving them powerless while you continue forward unshaken. God's timing in this is perfect. The loss of influence ensures the collapse is permanent. Reputation can recover in time, but influence requires trust, fear, or authority. All things that cannot be faked or rebuilt quickly once exposed. Your enemy's real defeat is measured not in embarrassment but in impotence. And in that silence, in that powerless void, you realize the magnitude of freedom and advantage God has placed in your hands, while the systems built to suppress you crumble beyond repair. Number 13, celebration comes because your season of self-doubt ends here. Self-doubt is a quiet thief. It creeps in slowly, making you question your decisions, your abilities, and even your worth. It whispers that maybe the criticism was true, that maybe you weren't strong enough, smart enough, or deserving enough to succeed. For months, maybe even years, you carried that weight silently, often wondering if the frustration, setbacks, and opposition were signs that you were failing. But God's public exposure of your enemies changes that. When the truth comes to light and their deception is revealed, the season of self-doubt finally ends, because the reality confirms what you already knew in your heart. You were never the problem. This is not just a moment of relief, it's a turning point. All the times you hesitated, second-guessed yourself, or tried to measure up to someone else's narrative were tests in disguise. God allowed the doubts, not to break you, but to refine your understanding of truth versus perception. When your enemies are exposed, all the mental and emotional battles you fought in silence are validated. You see clearly that their words, actions, and lies were designed to obscure reality, not correct it. The beauty of this moment is that it doesn't just bring vindication, it brings freedom. No longer do you carry the invisible weight of what if, or maybe I was wrong. The clarity that emerges rewires your confidence. Decisions that were once paralyzed by fear of judgment or doubt can now be made with certainty. Actions that were once cautious because of hidden pressures can now be bold and unapologetic. Celebration in this context is deep, lasting, and unshakable. It's not loud or fleeting. It's a profound internal shift where peace replaces anxiety and faith replaces fear. God's timing ensures that the end of self-doubt coincides with the undeniable exposure of those who tried to distort your story. The release is complete, the validation is permanent, and the victory is real. From this moment onward, you move forward unburdened, fully aligned with your purpose, and free to operate in the confidence that was always meant to be yours. Number 14. God humiliates enemies by letting the truth speak for itself, without noise or theatrics. One of the most powerful ways God works is quietly, but decisively. He doesn't need fanfare, public announcements, or dramatic interventions to prove a point. Instead, he allows the truth to rise on its own, pure, undeniable, and self-sufficient. When your enemies are exposed in this way, it's devastating not because someone is attacking them, but because their deception collapses under its own weight. Lies cannot withstand scrutiny, manipulations cannot survive transparency, and arrogance cannot outlast reality. God's method is so precise that the exposure feels effortless, yet it carries an unshakable finality. This approach teaches a crucial lesson. Nothing destroys falsehood faster than clarity. While your enemies may have tried to spin stories, manipulate perceptions, or rewrite events to suit themselves, the truth doesn't bend. It accumulates quietly, stacking fact upon fact until it cannot be ignored. By the time exposure happens, every lie they told, every manipulation they attempted, and every unjust action is visible, not because of your defense, not because of arguments, but because reality cannot be faked. God lets the truth do the work, and that is more humiliating than any human confrontation ever could be. The impact of this is profound. People witness what has been hidden for too long and see clearly who was right, who acted with integrity, and who thrived on deception. The humiliation of your enemies is complete because it is undeniable. There is no counter-narrative strong enough to survive the weight of reality. And for you, there is liberation. You don't need to strategize, defend, or fight back. The truth has already won the battle. This kind of vindication is permanent and transformative. It doesn't just correct a moment. It rewrites perceptions, restores justice, and reclaims your space. By letting the truth speak for itself, God ensures that the humiliation is both thorough and precise. The outcome is clean, undeniable, and irreversible, leaving no question that what was hidden, distorted, or undermined has now been fully revealed, and your enemy's fall is complete, silent, and absolute. Conclusion. The journey from being misunderstood, underestimated, or attacked to seeing God intervene publicly is more than just a story of justice. It's a revelation of divine timing, precision, and truth. Every delay, every moment of restraint, every ounce of patience you've held on to was never wasted. God doesn't operate in haste. He operates in perfection. He allows your enemies to reveal themselves fully, to exhaust their lies, and to overreach, all so the truth can rise in a way that is undeniable, permanent, and transformative. This is not about revenge or ego. It's about clarity, freedom, and restoration. Your credibility is restored, your reputation vindicated, and your peace secured. The humiliation your enemies face isn't just punishment. It's the natural consequence of their own choices colliding with the power of truth. And in all of this, the real celebration isn't loud or fleeting. It's quiet, deep, and enduring. It's the relief of knowing that you were never the problem, that your restraint mattered, and that your growth and purpose cannot be denied. Every point we've explored, from the collapse of false narratives to the exposure of systems built on your silence, from the end of self-doubt to the permanent loss of influence for those who opposed you, paints a clear picture. God's public vindication is precise, deliberate, and unstoppable. It's a season of truth prevailing, of peace replacing struggle, and of freedom finally arriving. Your enemy's schemes are laid bare, and you step into your power, unshaken, unapologetic, and fully aligned with your destiny. If this message resonates with you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button to join the community, like this video to show your support, comment below to share your thoughts or experiences, and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth today. Let's celebrate the victories together, embrace the power of truth, and walk confidently into the season God has prepared for each of us. Stay blessed always.